want to look in this video at some HTML code that has some buttons on it and connecting that button event, the user clicking the button, to some JavaScript code. The URL seen is a link to the code that I'm going to show you. Okay, so I'm going to use Visual Studio Code, and the first thing I'm going to do here is open the folder where the file is that I want to show you. So open folder, and it is in my downloads. So I'm just going to open the downloads folder. And then I'm going to look here at my Explorer. And here's what I want to show you, this button. Okay. And what else do I want to show you? And HTML can be written in many editors. Something simple as like Notepad, any sort of text editor will do, and then you run it on a browser. So you don't really need anything fancy, but Visual Studio Code does give you some nice features. So I want to show just a couple. So one of the reasons I didn't open the file, but I opened the folder, is because I want to work with what's called the live server. So here in Visual Studio Code, you can see you can add abilities to Visual Studio Code. And so one of the extensions that I use, especially with HTML, is called the live server. And there it is, live server. Now you can see by the gear here that I've already got it installed. But what that allows is, I don't need to search that anymore. That was just searching for it if I didn't have it, but I do have it. But if you wanted to install it on yours, then I can sort of right click and say open with live server. And if I had opened the file rather than the folder, it would complain at this stage. But because I've opened the folder, this should work. And it's bringing up, I think this is Edge that it's brought it up in. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller here. Okay, so that's the HTML page we're going to be looking at. And you could just open it as a local file. You could just go here and find it in the Explorer. I'm on a Windows machine, so find it in Explorer and open it, double click it, and it would open in a browser. Other examples later, I would have my JavaScript read a data file, and for security reasons, it doesn't want to do that unless it's on a server, and therefore, so there's an advantage to this live server in that it's acting like a server, and there are certain security things that want to be on a server that will act properly if you're using the live server. So there aren't differences in this simple program, but in some programs, there'll be a difference between just sort of clicking it and opening it as a local file in a browser versus opening it in the server. So I just sort of thought, from the beginning, open it in the live server. Okay, what else do I want to show you? Maybe a little bit about Visual Studio Code before I dive into this. I have another extension. I have my extensions showing here. Another extension I happen to have a CSS formatter. And that was an extension that I had. So I can right click and open in the live server. Another thing I can do is format the document. And in this document, I have the style is within the HTML, but in later examples, I'll separate the style. And if I want to not worry about indenting, if I'm going to be sloppy, but then I want to sort of clean it up, then I like to have the availability of this sort of automatic formatting. So I can right click and say format. Now it looks like it doesn't do anything because I've already formatted it. But if I had things sort of not indented properly, and I said format document, it sort of puts it in lines, sort of, and adding this extension for CSS formatting would do the same for a CSS file. So that is another extension. So I have the live server extension and the CSS formatter extension. Another feature I like, I've edited it, so let me save. Another feature I like of Visual Studio Code is if I wanted to make an HTML from scratch, I can say a new file, and then right now it thinks it's a text file, but I want to make an HTML file. So let me save it again in downloads. I'll call it example.htm. Let's just say HTML. And then if I come along and I'm hitting Shift exclamation point, I get this thing called emmet abbreviation. And then I can get the beginning of an HTML document, a lot of people call them boilerplate. So it has an open HTML tag and a close HTML tag, an open header and a closed header, an open body and a closed body, and the title. And the boilerplate is not nicely formatted, so I can format it by right-clicking and choosing format. But it gives you that code automatically, except when it doesn't. And so I had this feature and this emmet feature, and then lost it. So let me show you sort of two ways of sort of, I don't know, if you have lost it or don't have it, how to get it or how to get it back. So you can go to a file and preferences, settings, and then here search for emmet, and where is it? The expanded abbreviation. There it is. This is the one that gives you that. And there are different options here: never, always, or in markup and style sheet files only. So I have right now always, and I had lost this line altogether and had to get it back. This is one way to get it back: to go again to File, Preferences, Settings, and then search for what you want. I happen to know it's called emmet. And then there are a number of things called emmet, but this one was the expanded abbreviation. So this is what was giving me I typed the exclamation point, and then it was giving me this boilerplate code. Another approach is this. This is all handled by this settings JSON file. So one thing I can do is get into the settings JSON file here after I've gone through File, Preferences, Settings. If you sort of scroll up and down and look around, you'll find these links of edit settings in JSON. Another approach is Control-Shift-P up here and say open settings. Now here is this JSON file that sort of has some control over what your Visual Studio Code does and doesn't do. And you have to be used to a JSON. So the first approach is if you are uncomfortable with JSON, let it type the JSON for you. But if you're comfortable with JSON and know the JSON you need to type, say you've looked something up on the web and it says, here's the JSON you need to add, then this approach might be more useful. So you have these key value pairs. So here is here's a property of this settings file called file associations, and then it's followed by a colon, and then there is an object in here, and it says files that have the extension HTML should be treated as HTML. And I could probably add another line in here. If they're HTMs, also treat them as HTMLs or something like that. But all of these things are separated, all these properties, the colon, and then the value for that property. And then they're all separated by commas. So so if I were adding this new one and typing the JSON myself, then I would have to remember the comma, or it would be badly formed JSON. And then I have to know, again, from looking something up on the internet, the name of the property, emmet.showExpandedAbbreviation, and then the colon, and then what property I wanted to give it to, always, never. Okay, so that's 2 ways of changing the settings. Okay, so now to this button example. Okay, so we saw, I had it open here in Edge. I have 3 buttons on this page, and some of the code I have is, I believe I have some console logs. I have some console logs here. So I have some alerts. So that's going to be a pop-up, and we'll see that. And something's going to change on the page, and something's going to change in the console, which is a little bit behind the scenes, but let me show you how for you to see what's behind the scenes. So if I were to, again, I'm on Windows and this is Edge, I'm right-clicking and saying inspect. And then I get here a number of things on various tabs, but here is one of them is the console. So if I click the first button, here is my alert. Number 1, hello from the button, okay. And then here's a 1 that I'm typing over in the console. And then here's what I changed on the page. Changing the page from handle button. And I've also disabled this button, so I can't click it again. So no more actions in the console. The second button will do that. All the buttons do pretty much the same, except we're going to connect the code, connect the action to the JavaScript in slightly different ways of these 3 versions. So here is button 2, hello from the button. Over here's the 2 in the console, and here's the change. And now this one's disabled. And finally, the third one, 3 hello from button. Here's the 3 in the console. Here's the change to the HTML page. And now this one is disabled. And if I refresh the page, it goes back and the buttons are now enabled. Okay, so let's have a look at the code. We have sort of hopefully well-formed HTML. We have an HTML tag, which should be closed at way at the bottom. We have a head tag. This is usually the stuff mostly that you don't see. The one thing you do see in the head is the title, and that is the tab. What's on the tab is the title of the page. This is an HTML comment if you want to comment out your code. Clearly, I can't spell button. An HTML comment is this less than sign, which I'll often refer to as an open angle bracket, and then an exclamation and dash dash, and it's closed off by sort of dash dash and a greater than sign, or what I'll call a close angle bracket. And then in between that is an HTML tag. There's a meta tag that tells us that this is sort of uses the basic symbols, UTF-8, the sort of normal English European language symbols. I might have to change this if I were making a page that were in Japanese. It has some style. There's a styling of the body. You can see on the page this maroon color, and then this, so background color is the sort of the fill, and then color is the page, that basically the font color. That is a light gray. It's an Arial font, which is the basic family is a sans serif font, and padding means to sort of put a little bit of space around things so that they're not jammed up right against the edge. So that's the styling of the body. And what else have we got here? And then here's another nice feature of Visual Studio Code is that it knows that all of this code, all of this is related to the body, and I can sort of collapse it. So that's a convenient feature. So it's still all there. It's just that you looking in Visual Studio Code don't have to be looking at it. Div is, and we'll see below, there are tags called divs, and they sort of isolate a section on the web page. It's sort of division. And there's a margin on the top and a margin on the bottom. So this is some spacing around it so that things aren't too jammed together. And we've made the div styling, we'll call inline block, display inline block. So a normal styling of div, if you don't sort of add your own style to it, then a div will want to be sort of by itself on a line and sort of not share any of the space with anything else. So anything before it would be on its own line, anything after it would be on its own line. It doesn't like to share. It likes to be alone. Inline block, so on a div by itself would be a block, but inline block is saying that it will share the space with other things. And block means that it's going to be allowed to have things like width and height, things like that. But inline block means that I'm going to have those block features, but I'm also willing to be on the line with other things. I'm in the line with other things. Now, if there are too many things, the web page will wrap it around. But if there's room for it, it will share its space. Then the input is another tag. So right now I'm just styling tags. You can style things other than tags, which we'll see at another time. But in here, in the HTML, there are buttons, are input tags. There are two ways to write buttons. There's later versions of HTML have an explicit button tag, but there's also a generic input tag of the type button. And so that's the kind of buttons I've made here are input buttons rather than, button buttons. And so here's the styling of them. We're given a specific width. We changed their color. We swapped two colors. So now the basic color is gray and the writing is red and they're in bold and they have some padding. So you see that here's the regular sort of body, and then the buttons reverse that style. So that's all the style. So I can collapse the whole style. Okay. There's the end of the head, and here's the beginning of the body. The body is, for the most part, what you're going to see on the page. So there's a head, an open head, and a closed head, an open body and a closed body. And I always say there's no neck. There's a head and there's a body. There should be sort of nothing here. Okay, this is a header, the H1, H2. There's a series of these tags. And this just determines that and it's sort of a large font. So these tags are sort of about how it looks. There's a different header tag, which is spelled out header, which is more what they call a semantic header that's more describing the purpose of what's inside. And so if you write out header, you're using a semantic tag that's saying the stuff in here is serving the purpose of a header. Whereas if you're using an H1 tag, you're more saying what you want it to look like, to be a sort of somewhat large font, etc. Okay. So here is my button. I made the input style of button. I gave it an ID. IDs are useful for when we're writing code. To refer to the item on the page. There are different kinds of inputs. This is a button type. For a button, the value is just what's written on the button. And then over here, we have, here is one way of connecting the code, our JavaScript code, to the HTML, and that is to have an attribute of the button of the input that says on click, and then we're saying here's a function which we're going to define below that we want to be called and executed when the user clicks. And it's on click with a small c, and then you can get away without the keyword return. So you could just say handle button. This is a name that we made up, and it must match exactly something we have below. And open close parentheses indicate that it is a function. And input tag is a singleton. So a lot of HTML tags have an open and close tag, but an input is a singleton. So it in this little slash, you're sort of indicating that it's closing itself, though one doesn't need to do that. The browser will figure it out, and it isn't a singleton without that. Here is a div. So this is the place for the result. And then I have a break, which means move me on to the next line. So here is the button, and here's the div. Remember, the div was styled to be inline block. If that were not the case, then this div would be below the button, because on its own, a div wants to be by itself. Here's our second input, a different ID. All ID should be different. Type button, here's what it says. And then there's no on click here. We're going to connect the code, the button's action to code differently. So we'll see that below. And here's the div for which we're going to interact with. The div was also given an ID. Anything that you want to interact with JavaScript should be given an ID so that you can in code identify the element that you're working with. So then here is button 2 and div 2 and another break. And then the third button is rather like the second button in terms of the HTML. It's an input, it's of the type button, it's got an ID, a unique ID, button click 3. It's got a value. There's no on click attribute here. So there's nothing saying at this stage what should happen when the button is clicked. Well, it'll occur below. And here's a div for the result of 3. And that's the end of the things that you see on the page. And the rest is script. So let me sort of close the script and then open the script. So you see here that if I close the script, there's nothing in the body. This is the div result 3. That's the last thing that's visible on the page. Everything else is code in the script tag. Okay, and this is a JavaScript comment. Any line that begins with / is a sort of a single line comment or inline comment. And so here is, you remember the first button said on click return handle button 1. And so then we must define handle button 1. So we use the keyword function, and then this must match exactly case sensitive, handle button 1, open close parentheses, and then curly brackets. Curly brackets identify the block of code that is defining this function. So everything in the curly brackets belongs to this function. Here is that alert, that thing that popped up, and it says number 1 hello from button. You remember that if I refresh the page, enable the button, if I click the button, it says hello from button 1. The next thing that shows up is the console, and then it changes something on the page. So here was the alert. Here was the console. Here is us changing the page. So if I'm changing something on the page, then the element of the page appears on the left-hand side of what we call an assignment statement. So this equal indicates an assignment statement. So I'm going to make something equal to something else. And so I take what's on the right, which is just what we call a string literal, just some words in quotes. And then I am taking that and making it I'm going to the page document. I'm finding an element on the page. Everything in an HTML page is referred to as an element. I'm finding the element with an ID of div result 1. And inner HTML is what's between the open and the close tag. And I'm saying make what's between the open and close tag this text. And it's HTML, so I could put in here tags, like make it bold, or I could add other HTML elements on the fly, but I'm just adding some text. So it could be more because it's inner HTML, but in this case, it's simply just text. Okay, so this is an assignment statement, document get element by ID, div result 1 dot inner HTML equals something quote. And here I am disabling the button. So I make it so that that button click 1 is disabled. So there's a disabled property, and if I make the disabled property true, that means that the user's not going to be able to click on the button. And that is the end of my handle button 1, which was called by having an onclick attribute in the input for that first button. Here is a page load that is called by the body's onload method, and it's calling a function called handle page load. And what that is doing is taking button click 1, taking the disabled property and making it false. So basically enabling it. Okay. Here, I did that same thing, but differently. I just took button click 2 disabled equals false. These are slightly different. Here, I waited till the page was loaded, and then I called this function. And here I just have some code in my script. So here's my script. I have a function. In my function, this is handle button 1. That's a function. Here's handle page load. That was a function. This code that is enabling button click 2 is not in a function. So functions wait until they are called, until somebody tells them to act. So this is told to act when somebody clicks the first button, and this is told to act when the page is finally loaded. This just acts as we're going down through the script, but the script is at the bottom of the body. So all the body sort of already exists before this script occurs. So then this action is very similar to this handle page load, because the body of the browser was rendering the page because it encountered all this code before it came to the script. So these two things have a fairly similar purpose, but that's because of where I've placed my script at the bottom of my HTML, which I will often do because that makes this a little bit easier than that. But they're similar, different ways to do it, but similar. But this makes life a little bit easier if my script is at the end of my HTML. Though sometimes I'll put it at the beginning, so I do different things at different times. But okay, here is button 2, and let me make a little bit more room there. That's better. So here's button 2. You remember that button 1 had this onclick attribute that connected the code to the element. There was nothing here in the HTML to associate the second button with any code. That's being done here. I'm saying document get element by ID button click to find on the page this thing, and then add an event listener. So instead of up at the top in the more in the HTML rather than in the script, in button 1 we said on click. Down here we're having a similar effect, but we're saying add a click event listener. So when the user clicks this button, let's execute this code. And what we're doing right here is what's known as an anonymous function. So we're going to have a function, but there's no name. And we're immediately, as soon as we say that we're going to have a click event, we start to say, okay, here's the function to do it. So here's the addEventListener. What are we listening for? We're listening for a click. Okay, let's immediately start filling in the code. And we're not even going to name it. There's no separation between the idea that we're clicking and what it is we want to do when we click. So we don't have to give it a name. The name is when they get sort of separated, and then we find that thing with that matching name. That's what we do. But here, since there's no separation, we don't need to give it a name, and hence it's called an anonymous function. It doesn't have a name. Similar code to the first button: alert, console.log, document div element by ID div result2.enter.html, doc get element by ID button click to disable is true. So it's the same code, just the connection between a user action, the click, and the code is different. The first was an attribute in the HTML on click. And here it's more pure JavaScript that we're going to have an event. And then here's the function to handle it. So all we need to know here is the ID from the HTML. And version 3, here is, again, so this is outside of a function. So that's like here. So that's as soon as we encounter the script, this gets executed, and it is the disabled false, or the enabling of button 3. Okay, and here is us saying that the third button should have a click listener, and then here's the name of the function that is going to handle the clicking of the button. And then here it is, the same old alert, console, change the div, disable the button. But in version 2, we made the function right away, so we didn't have to give the function a name. Down here, we're giving the function a name, so then we have to say function and then the name. Okay. So why might you want to, what's the advantage of this versus, say, the anonymous? If I had code that I wanted to have maybe associated with more than one event, if I had different events that might lead me to the same code, then if I do an anonymous function, I'd have to sort of copy that code repeatedly for each anonymous function. Whereas if I name the function, then I can use that same named function from different event listeners. So if I had different buttons, or if I had different events, if I had them entering some code, and if they typed an enter, if I wanted it to somehow ultimately lead to this code or something, then this naming the function has that advantage. Then I can use the function more than once. That is one advantage. Another possible advantage, and it's more a matter of taste than anything else, but another possible advantage is if I had lots of events, then I can, at the sort of top of my JavaScript code, sort of announce this way, sort of here are all the events that I'm interested in, and then define the functions. So if I'm doing anonymous, I've got to define the function right away. And then, so all my different events might get separated from one another by these anonymous functions. But I could, with this named function approach, I could sort of list and sort of like a little tight pack at the top, all of my events and all of the methods that are going to be handled by them. So this allows me to bring all the events together if I want to do that. And it also allows me to associate a function with more than one event if I want to do that. Okay, I think that's what I wanted to show you in this example. Thanks much for your attention.